G'day, I'm Kate Watson. Clare Stephens will be, for many, a name synonymous with Mamamia. After all, she's been there for nearly a decade, holding roles such as editor-in-chief and executive editor, as well as hosting some of their most popular podcasts, Cancelled and But Are You Happy? Clare is also a twin, her sister being Jessie Stephens, host of one of the biggest podcasts in Australia, Mamamia Out Loud. The twins, as they're known, shared the womb, shared their childhood, shared jobs, shared careers. They even share Instagram accounts. But in February, Clare announced she was leaving Mamamia for good, leaving her podcast behind, and in her words, seeing what she's capable of on her own. So I was curious, what's it like to leave all that behind, and what's on the cards next? Clare, you announced you'd be leaving Mamamia just in February, so very recently. You've had nearly 10 years there. You started the beginning of your career at Mamamia. You were editor-in-chief, you were executive editor. Now you're completely removed from Mamamia. Who is Clare Stephens without Mamamia?
Great question. I have no idea. No, leaving Mamamia was a big decision identity-wise because, as you say, I'd been there for a decade and kind of built who I was in those years. And I think hopefully I keep reminding myself that what you've done doesn't disappear once you've left a company. Like, identity is something that's evolving and changing, and regardless of whether you're at the same place or not. So even at Mamamia, I felt like I worked for 5 different companies and worked in several different roles because that's the nature of media and that's the nature of that company, that it grew immensely while I was there. The direction changed, the boom of podcasts, like there was so much that changed that I feel like I had several careers within that. So leaving, I'm kind of like, it's just the next natural step of kind of following where my instincts are in media. And I hope coming out of it that what I want to do is slow down, focus on depth and quality, and focus on really putting my energy and resources into projects that matter a lot to me and focusing less on volume, which is what you do in digital media. You just kind of, it's the dopamine hit of publishing as much as you can and getting as much content out there as you can. And I kind of thought, hold on, I want to make a big impact and I want to make sure that what I do is really intentional and that I get to kind of have the career that I want and that I'm not just kind of following what's directly in front of me. And I'm not very good at decision making or saying no, and I'm very loyal. So all of those things were working against me, hence being in the same workplace for such a long time. But yeah, it's exciting.
How long did it take you to make the decision?
I think I was thinking about it for a while. I was sort of going back and forth, and I was chatting to Mamamia about it, like how whether it would evolve into a different role or whether I would leave. And so those conversations were really open and transparent and went on for quite a little bit. But there was also the kind of personal element of my twin sister works at Mamamia. We've been there together for so long. And I thought, as an individual, I think a psychologist would tell me I need to discover who I am outside of my dynamic with my sister. So I thought it's sort of both a professional and a personal decision that I hope will pay off.
I think that was going to be my next question. You've kind of answered it, but anyone I sort of asked about, I said, I'm talking to Clare Stephens, what would you like to know? You won't be surprised to know.
Yeah.
They mostly wanted to understand that part of the separation. And I mean, it's not like you won't be creating content together and you won't be still sisters. Like that doesn't go away, of course. But that leaving your sister, how much of that was part of the difficulty of making a call like this? Or maybe it was actually made it easier?
It's like I'm still in two minds about it because it is incredibly easy to work with Jessie, and we always say that we were kind of each other's editor from the beginning. Like everything we wrote, probably people even at work don't know this, but every time we ever submitted anything, we'd have each other read it first.
Homework?
Yeah. Yes.
Assignments?
Yes.
Okay.
Just everything.
Yeah.
And it was always like, honestly, do you think this is good? And then it would be changing each other's work and saying, that's lame, that's a crap argument. No, that's going to be interpreted the wrong way. Like, we kind of have been editing each other's work. So even the idea of putting something out into the world without having her look at it is terrifying.
Will that happen though?
Yeah, like I've kind of the stuff that I've been doing so far, even doing, op-eds or Substack or whatever, that's been my personal challenge. I'm like, I am going to trust my own instincts and I'm going to get it wrong. And there are probably going to be times where I'll think, hold on, I should have given Jessie a read of it. But the idea is to sort of learn to back myself a little bit. And I think there's safety in having that person who is going to be brutally honest with you and is going to also has your best interests at heart. But there's also kind of a negative safety where if you're an anxious person, you're constantly checking. And I think for confidence and that sort of thing, you need to just be willing to back yourself.
Is it a maturing? I mean, you recently became a mother. You just told me Matilda's 15 months old.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's a part of that process that's made you give you a new perspective or it's matured you a little bit? I don't know if I've actually heard you talk about that, but
yeah,
I'm interested.
I think so. And interestingly, I wouldn't have said that. I know a lot of women give birth and have a huge sense of
I've changed.
Power. I've changed and I am more powerful than I ever thought I was. A lot of women have that experience. I don't think I had it immediately after birth because I was like, what the hell was that? But in kind of, I think now looking back on birth and having a newborn and raising a child, you do kind of learn what you're made of and what's important. You kind of get this really big picture perspective on what matters to you, what your values are, what you want to prioritize. You also, I don't know if you've got this, as soon as I had Matilda, I was like, time is finite. Hold on, I don't have forever. I've only got so many years where I can have the career I want, where I can be the parent that I want to be. And so I think that was a big part of it that I thought, hold on, I've always had in my head that I want to have this phase of my career where I go and do something on my own and I really challenge myself and I own something. When is that going to happen if that doesn't happen now? I don't have infinite time to do that. So I think it was kind of the idea of the shifting of what life is and what mortality means.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I should think about this more. But I do relate very much to the phases thing.
Yeah.
You have to take control of that. And get yourself into that next phase. I'm curious to tie together, you had that very successful podcast called But Are You Happy? It was where you spoke to celebrities that we all know about, I think mainly about vulnerability and being vulnerable and asking them to be really vulnerable. Is this decision a little bit about being more vulnerable and leaning into that?
I think so. I think it's a risk. It's kind of the ultimate vulnerability for me, as somebody whose identity has been wrapped up in another person and also wrapped up in a business to then stand there and see if you're enough on your own. It sounds scary because it is. But I think doing that podcast and talking to people about happiness also made it really clear to me that where people find happiness is not in the achievement or the outcome, but in the process of whatever they're doing. So if it's an actor, if it's a comedian, a writer, a musician, it's when you ask them what makes them happy, it is never about when I stood on stage and got this award. It's the time spent at their desk when they really got meaning, which led to happiness. And so I think that also had a bit of a reframe in my mind about, okay, I'm getting the short-term dopamine hits of writing
a piece
a story.
doing well,
exactly.
or a podcast doing well,
exactly.
or an interview being well praised.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, what I need to do is slow down and fall in love with the process of what I'm doing and build meaning that way and hopefully happiness.
Well, one of the other, and it's a little bit of a theme for me, I guess, with you is this question about vulnerability. But one of the things I really admire about people like yourself is this, and when I spoke to Mia on this podcast, I asked her the same question, but you have had a very public life, like your personal life and your public life and your job. It's quite tied up in sharing a lot about yourself. And I would argue you've been vulnerable for a really long time with heaps and heaps of Australian people, women. Did that start accidentally and then just snowballed? Like, did that get ahead of you? Would you like to have gone back in time and gone, oh, I might not share that much? Or
I think
are you pleased? Like,
I'm having that a lot now, and weirdly, after writing my book, so my novel is about somebody who works in media and who writes something that gets interpreted in a way she didn't anticipate, and then it's kind of about the social media pile-on that happens after that. And it was weird. Through writing the book, it was the most meditative experience of like unpacking my own time in media and why I've done what I've done. And I think the things that I've shared, there's nothing huge that I think about and think I wish I hadn't shared that about myself. There's a lot of opinions that I look back 5 years ago and just cringe, and I think, oh my gosh, I hope the person I was writing that opinion about didn't read it, because dear God, I was an idiot. But in terms of things I've shared about myself, I weirdly have almost a block where I don't think about it. I say to my partner, because he's like, how can you put stuff out there? Like, I could never do that. And I'm like, I weirdly have a block where I think it's going to no one. Like, I just tell myself no one's reading it, no one's seeing it. But I think actually the very unconscious reason for it is that it is actually a lazy shortcut to connection. And I have been a bit lazy. I think normal, healthy people, they have really close friendships, really close relationships where they share all that stuff with each other. And I do. I've got my partner, I've got my sister, I've got a great group of friends. But I think for me, when I look back on the last decade, I'm like, I think sometimes I was sharing things to almost get the shortcut to connection.
To engagement or connection.
Yes.
Okay.
So you get, people reaching out to you and saying, yes, I've had that exact experience. I know how that feels. And I'm kind of taking a step back now and being like, I think there's power in that. And I think, I've been incredibly moved by things I've seen or read that have spoken to an experience I've had. But I'm like, I think the healthy way to do that is just with the people in your life.
It's really, it was kind of, and I don't want to say the times ended, but in a media sense, it's kind of its time to be doing that. And we get a lot of people over the course of our Squiz journey, I guess, saying if only you would tell more people more about you and how you're feeling and all of that you probably would have grown the business faster, or we probably know that's true, but we never have. But it was the moment to do it. Like you were kind of in this phase where, I think you started with blogging, and then this was the moment we were in.
Yep.
Are you seeing a shift away from that from an audience perspective as well? Like, do people want to still engage in personal stories, or are they looking for a bit more distance?
Weirdly, I think what it's led to, I think it's quite a linear trajectory from that era of like the personal essay leading into now, where brands and people are almost indistinguishable. Like you look at, social media and you just see people are following, sometimes they are following individuals for the news instead of following a news organisation for the news. Like people have become proxies for ideas or ideologies. It's this weird thing that's happened that I don't think is necessarily healthy for those individuals or for us as a culture. I think that people are very much continuing to engage with individuals and their stories and their vulnerabilities. But I think what we've created, and I think it's unfortunately happened among women, because that kind of revolution of women writing personal essays on the internet, it happened because I think a lot of women were like, hold on, like I just had a miscarriage, and why don't I know anything about miscarriage? And then you either write about it or you read stuff online. Mia Friedman tells a story about having a miscarriage and looking around, and there just wasn't anything about it. And it's just so bizarre because women's experiences for all of human history have just not been recorded in the same way as men's experiences. So I think it was this really, really powerful era, and I know why it happened. But now I think what we're getting to is this clash where you probably find it with parenting all the time. When we don't seem to know what to do when people share their experiences and they don't align with ours. And we get very, very upset and very emotional. And we're at a crossroads where we cannot see somebody just sharing their individual experience, and it's their experience and it's not a judgment of you. We really see that as like promoting an overarching ideology that is telling us how we should be. And so I think we're in a funny era that's been created by this whole boom of sharing personal experiences. And I do think because of that, some of the beauty of more objective journalism has been lost, because it's easier to write first person and it's easier to write about you than it is to do a 6 months long investigation on something that's important. So I think we've come to a really interesting time.
Well, I want to tie that in. I mean, I really promise everyone that's listening we will get to what you're doing next. I'm building up to it because we're definitely going to talk about that. But one of the things I'm trying to toss up where to go with the next question. I think it is a little bit about asking you about the cancel culture stuff. I mean, you had that podcast cancelled. How does that feel?
Yeah, very sad. I love and the community of listeners we had on that show are the funniest. We had a joke on the show about lazy girls, and they'd still come up, no, I'm a lazy girl and I miss cancel. But everybody says it was the laziest girl thing that you guys did by just ending the show. We're like, yeah, it was lazy.
Yeah, on brand.
Yeah, very
There are
on brand.
a lot of people that are upset about that. Will it continue without you?
No, I
done.
don't believe so. Yes.
Okay.
All done.
There you go.
Yeah.
If you were wondering.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it was a comedy podcast. It's supposed to be fun, but the undertone was cancel culture and why we cancel people and why that happens. Do you think that's gone too far? Where are you on cancel culture these days? And is this tied up in the same thing? Like we're quick to judge?
Yeah. So it was essentially the theme of my book. So I've spent the last 18 months to 2 years.
Is the book
thinking,
done?
Yes.
The book's done?
Done, yes.
But not out till October?
Coming out in end of September. Yeah.
That's too long with the printers.
I know. This is what I mean about trying to slow down and have it and enjoy the process. But I'm like, it's done. Why isn't it published?
Yeah.
So I have kind of been literally thinking about exactly that for 2 years. And I kept thinking as I was writing it, oh, maybe the moment's going to pass and this book is going to be totally irrelevant. And then every time I had that thought, something would happen. I'm like, oh, no, just as relevant as ever. I think what's happening is that the more time we're spending online, which I think is just creeping and creeping and creeping. It's just terrifying how much time we're all spending online, and I'm speaking about myself as well. I think we are dehumanizing people generally, because when you interact more with people as two-dimensional images and videos and you're not interacting with them in real life, it is so easy to dehumanize them. And because of that, I actually think in terms of cancel culture, there's a little bit more nuance where we've had, John Ronson wrote So You've Been Publicly Shamed a decade ago, and there's been some sort of really good journalism and really good thought about this public shaming and that sort of thing. But I actually think we're becoming more vicious, and the dehumanization is getting more and more severe, and we are becoming more intolerant simply because of the amount of time we're spending on our phones and not engaging in the real world. So
talk to me about the book. Because if it all ties into this.
Yes.
What's the title?
It's called The Worst Thing I've Ever Done.
Yep. And it's fiction.
And it's fiction, yes. And it's about a woman who is working in a media company. She interviews someone, she publishes a story, and it is called out by somebody online. And it's sort of about the emotional experience of being attacked online and how it completely warps how you then respond, that you can't respond in a normal, healthy way. And you're being asked to take accountability, but you don't think you did anything wrong, and you kind of feel like you're screaming and no one's listening. And so it's sort of about this this really specific feeling of being misunderstood, and about how people, I think a lot of people who are content creators are doing it because they really want to be liked and they really want to be understood. And the irony is that doing that is a pretty quick-fire way to make sure there are a lot of people out there who do not like you and do not understand you. And so it's about the emotional experience of that, but it's also about shame and the fact that for this particular character, she is being shamed for this thing she's done online, and it kind of is picking at a scab of something that happened in her past that she is deeply ashamed of, and it sort of opens up this whole big wound of the worst thing she's ever done.
Is it funny?
I hope so. I hope parts are.
What are you going for? Because this is a big topic.
Yeah.
And it's quite serious. And you're talking about it very seriously.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because I kind of would have expected like a very colourful front cover and it's Clare Stephens. Like it's got to be funny and it's got to,
My editor was like, oh, darker than I thought.
Interesting.
But I hope that there are parts of where I've tried to find lightness and comedy is in kind of the media world and her interactions, and hopefully there is comedy in how you react when you're being called out and the little conversations that you have with people and the kind of way that you are unpacking it behind the scenes that nobody sees. Because you probably think when somebody's getting, piled on online, you probably think that they're sitting in a corner crying, which they might be, but the fact is they're also just bitching to everyone in their life, and they will not stop bitching, and they're trying to get people on board to say, like, isn't this person really cruel and really mean? And so I hope that there's some comedy in kind of the absurdity of all of it, the ironies of all of it, and just what the media world is like.
I feel like you're going to sell a few books. I
hope so.
Well, it's just a shame we have to wait till the end of September. But this is something I suspect that a lot of people will see you pop up on more and more. I mean, you published, I think, your first op-ed in the 9 Papers over the weekend. It was about Ben Cousins.
Yeah.
Where I'm going with this is you sort of tie together that this is a specific issue for women. You talk about him joining Seven's commentary team. He's obviously the former AFL player who won accolades, brilliant player, but many criminal charges over the years. Of his appointment, and I might just read back to you one of the things that you said, culturally we seem to be able to fold men's mistakes into our nuanced, multifaceted understanding of who they are as people. We don't give the same grace to women, not even when they haven't committed a crime at all but simply posted something tone deaf on Instagram. Do you think this is a specific issue for women?
Yes. I think women in media face something quite scary, and I think we kind of have to there's a bit of eye rolling when people talk about it, but I think we seriously need to examine it because I think it's going to scare women away from media, and it's going to scare women away from front-facing roles, because the idea of what can happen and the attacks that come from all different areas. Like I wrote that Ben Cousins op-ed, and for the first time in a long time, I had the men come after me, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And it didn't bother me too much. There was one guy who was bordering on kind of some verbal abuse, but it reminded me that kind of outrage online can come from all these different areas, and people don't see it. People don't see the messages. They might see a comment thread or whatever. But, I know that I've published things online and got like voice notes of people screaming, and we've had creepy things sent to the office. We have had these really kind of terrifying moments for things where in the moment these things feel like the biggest deal in the world. You've published something where you've used the wrong language and you've made a mistake. You've 100% made a mistake. You have done the wrong thing. You misjudged. You told a story in the wrong way. But even if you then say, I made a mistake, this was wrong, I am unconditionally sorry, that's then dissected. There's kind of not a way to do an apology that is accepted. I don't know.
And why do you think that's a specific issue for women?
Because I think with women, we really, what it reminds me of is like being in year 8 at school. Like I think there's something really, and I think it's patriarchy, and I think it's misogyny, and I think it's this idea of competitiveness, and that if somebody's taking up space, that's taking up somebody else's spot. But I also think it's genuinely something we have to contend with, that we find it a lot harder to find female public figures likeable. If you ask somebody who's the most likeable person in Australian media,
I know.
Who?
Hamish.
Hamish Blake.
Yeah.
100%. And Hamish Blake is freaking likeable. He's gorgeous. He's funny. He's great. But I would argue he doesn't have the same standards placed upon him that a woman in the same position would. So I think there's been several times over the last few years where whatever the big social issue is at the time, and it is a valid social question and it is a valid reckoning, we expect women to solve it. We expect women to be the ones to move aside for each other, or to make statements on every possible social issue, and whereas men can sort of just be a funny, larrikin, likeable guy, and it's totally uncomplicated. So I had the example in the Ben Cousins story of Georgia Love, who posted something on Instagram, which she did the wrong thing. It was an offensive post, and she posted it, and then it was up for a few minutes, and she went, I think she got a message from somebody, and she went, oh God, no. And so she deleted it, she apologised, and she was taken off air. She was taken off Channel 7. And when you look at who Channel 7 has kept on air when they have done all sorts of things, you just think,
I think you referenced Ben Roberts-Smith,
yes.
In managerial positions, and Ben Cousins.
Yeah. And you just think, paying Bruce Lohman's rent for a year, that sort of thing.
There was that.
And you just think, wow, a woman kind of stepping very, very briefly outside our lines of being a perfect human being has bigger consequences than a man breaking the law in terms of media and like public perception.
I'm so interested, and I because I want to actually ask you about men. Because did you go to an all-girls school?
Yeah.
So you went to an all-girls school. You have a sister. I know you have twin brothers as well.
Yeah.
But you also have worked in a very female environment.
Yeah.
We're now having a conversation about men, particularly young men, and I don't know how to draw the line together, because I'm not saying that what you said is the cause of this or anything. However, there is a lot of concern that the way that we're having this conversation with men is just making them stop listening, shut off, go and find other things to look at, things to see, don't want to talk about it. We're seeing huge problems amongst young men around radicalisation, if you want to go to the extremes, and I actually talked about that recently with Alistair McGibbon on this podcast. Do you think we're overcorrecting in some ways? I'm just interested in your experience coming from such a female environment with female audiences. How much thought I'm sure you have, you're a smart person, have you given to how that sounds to men and then the implications of that?
I think having explored shame for a couple of years, having read a lot about it, having thought a lot about it, I think what we're seeing with men is a response to shame. And I spoke to Tim Minchin about this when I interviewed him, and I think John Ronson is talking about this at the moment. I think he's writing a book on it. I think men are disillusioned and have sort of lost their place. I don't think it is the fault of feminism or the fault of women, or the fault of, for example, in media, it's kind of odd that I can say I've worked in women's media. If a man said I've worked in men's media, you'd be like, oh, well, I know what that looks like. You kind of, it's automatically shameful and wrong. the other side to that, obviously, is that for most of human history, media or news was just men. Like the reason
without
women's
saying
media,
it was men's media.
Yes.
So you had to make a distinction and say this is for women.
Yes. So women's media is a response to the fact that all of media was really designed for men. But I do think that what we have to do is allow for men to have the same spaces that, well, one, I actually think that I hope that some of the ideas around gender fluidity actually come into media and break down that divide. I kind of don't love the idea that men and women are consuming different things and that we think that your gender should affect what you're interested in or how you absorb it. Like I think hopefully the way we're going with our thinking about gender is that those can be broken down. At the same time, I do think if a whole lot of men are listening to something or following something, I don't know if just shaming it and criticising it without engaging with it in a meaningful way is that helpful. So, but there are exceptions to that, e.g. Andrew Tate.
Yeah, there's always that one.
Yeah.
that one example where you go, but maybe don't listen to what Andrew Tate says. But this is the conversation we had out of the back of the US election. Like, there's Joe Rogan and there's Call Her Daddy, and there's men and there's women, and then actually one of the next interviews, or it might actually already be out when I've put this one out, is with John Anderson, former deputy Prime Minister. The older generation will know him very well, but he has 700,000 followers on YouTube, mostly youngish men.
Yep.
He says young, 35 plus sort of. It's just interesting that that's the cohort that's going there. And it does seem, I agree with you, but like it is polarised media between men and women.
Yes, and I think what is contributing to that polarisation is that we do love, and I'm so guilty of this, we do love to take a snippet of what's happening in those corners and tear it to shreds with no context because it's fun and it's easy. For example, something that really challenged my ideas about this was that I've got a friend who listens to Jordan Peterson, has read his book, all of that. And I mocked him relentlessly and was like, no, go make your bed. Haha. Like, wow, I'm glad you need a degree in clinical psychology to give that advice. And when Jordan Peterson came to Australia a few years ago, I was like, well, I'll go to the show with you and I'll hear him speak. And I sat there and I listened to Jordan Peterson speak for an hour and I left and I went, he actually didn't say anything controversial. He's religious, he's Christian. I don't think that in itself is an issue, but in that hour, he didn't say anything that offended me. He didn't say, I mean, you could go on a really macro philosophical level that he talks about individual responsibility, and a lot of people would say, yes, but, you know, there are baked in disadvantages and that's all very true. But actually sitting there, I went, okay, we do love to take a little snippet of what somebody says. When I sat there and looked around, I went, I don't think these are not bad men sitting here listening to him. These are men who want to be inspired and motivated. With that said, I also went to the Milo Yiannopoulos event years ago and I've never been so terrified.
Interesting.
That was terrifying.
In what way?
Oh, the types of people who were there. I felt there was like aggression and rage around me. And he put up a photo of Clementine Ford and mocked it. And I just wanted to cry. I was like, that is so cruel. And how can these men sit here and think that they're getting anything out of that? But I do think there actually needs to be a bit of a differentiation between different kinds of people. And, you know, not lumping Joe Rogan in with Andrew Tate. They're different. Even though it's really annoying to say that, and I could argue about Joe Rogan all day, I think when you do that, it actually alienates men further, and it alienates them more and more and more and more and radicalizes them more instead of almost engaging on the things you do agree with. That it's like, yes, we can agree on, you know, like Joe Rogan has given a platform to some really interesting people and had really interesting conversations. I think the more you just say, I'm never having a conversation with anyone who listens to Joe Rogan, the worse it's getting for that radicalisation.
And it kind of brings us back to your earlier, like what you said at the very beginning, is that you do want to slow down and you do want to produce quality. I think there's definitely a trend towards that with what publishers want to do, media want to do, and creators want to do. So this brings me to what you are doing next. I mean, we've talked about the book. You can talk about it more if you want, or maybe we just get you back when it's actually out and we can unpick it. The other thing I said to you, like, what are you doing next? Like, give me a bit of background. You listed a whole heap of stuff. One of the things you said to me about podcasting, and you were super clear about this, is you want to retain the IP that you create. It's important in terms of scale. Is that something that's on the horizon for you, obviously, creating your own podcasts?
Yeah. What I really want to do is focus on my kind of words that I want to be my kind of guiding light are depth and quality and impact, and not volume. I have to keep reminding myself of that, yeah, it's sort of those words. I like impact is really important.
What impact?
I want...
The reason I'm so interested in this is it feels like a bit of a different Clare Stephens.
Yeah. Well, it is, and it is it like I want there to be a bit of a I want kind of humour to be able to exist alongside more philosophical discussions and rigour and like a whole lot of things to exist at the one time. But I think even if you're creating pop culture content or comedy content, I think the same rules apply in terms of quality and depth. And in terms of impact, what I mean is I think a lot of what we put out there, and this might be totally Pollyanna of me and totally too idealistic, but it's sort of like a sandcastle where you feel like you're kind of building something and then the tide comes at the end of the day and it washes it away because that's the news cycle. It's just like, bam, their stories no one will remember in a week's time. And I just want to focus more on content and storytelling that stands the test of time a little bit, and that I keep trying to remind myself with anything that I want to write or create that I'm like, don't get overcome by this sense of urgency. And we said it at Mamamia over and over and over again. When you're working in news, a day after a story has happened, you convince yourself, oh, the moment's over, everyone's forgotten about it. That is never the case. One, people are busy. People are far busier than you. So you tell a story and everyone's like, oh, what the hell? I completely missed that. And it's like, yeah, because everybody was busy. You were just scrolling the internet, so that's why you knew the story. But also, I think people do want some depth and to contend with ideas a bit more, and for the media we put out to be less transactional. And so in terms of impact, I want to do stuff that actually challenges people, that changes people's minds, or that entertains them and makes them laugh in a way that is a bit more intentional than what I've done before, where there's kind of a philosophy behind it, where it's like, this is the kind of humour that makes people feel good about themselves and that there's nobody at the butt of it and it's not hurting anyone, and I'm doing this from a place of this is what I really, really want to do, and not because it's almost muscle memory, because it's what you've been doing for so long.
So what can we expect? We can expect probably podcast series.
Yes.
So anything you want to tell us?
I've got a couple that I'm working on at the moment. I want to do standalone series. I want to lean into that because I think it allows you to put more resources and not be as bound by, this has to be out next week, and you get to really, really think about how you craft something, like almost audio documentary style stuff. So I'm really interested in that. And then I'm also interested in a kind of comedy zeitgeisty weekly show. So I'm kind of looking at those two at the moment and working out how best to make them, and avoiding the impulse to just grab a microphone and start right now. But thinking, how do you kind of do it and how do you plan? And retaining the IP is important for me in terms of creative ownership. Like, I think when you work in a business, it totally makes sense that they have the IP because the risk is on them. You're taking absolutely no risk. But the downside of it is that if they decide it's going to go in a different direction, you have to wear that. And I'm kind of in the phase where I'm like, I am happy to make mistakes, but I want them to be my mistakes.
And I mean, I think this is very much a question for the media nerds that I know listen to this podcast, but also you get the benefit of any profits, any revenue that are generated from that. Are you looking at paywall content, subscription-based content?
It's one thing I'm looking at. For the moment, what I feel compelled to do is sort of give it to the biggest audience possible. So I am not leaning towards that now, but I think it probably will be something I look at in the future. But I think it is really interesting to look at the different models of how you make things and kind of the risks and benefits of being independent. And it's really interesting because the podcast landscape just changes so quickly and it's changed so much.
Do we do videos now or do we do podcasts? I'm not really sure.
Everyone's like, it's got to go on YouTube. Yeah. I'm like, does it?
Yeah. These are the questions, and these are the questions we're all grappling with. This will be on YouTube, in case you were wondering. But what I'm hearing from you is, and I think it's probably good to just can this idea that there's like a competitor to Mamamia coming from Clare Stephens or anything like that. It's very much going to be about you as an individual creator and what you want to put out in the world.
Yeah, and very much like more of about depth and having an audience who hopefully get a lot out of content. But I am the first person to say I will never run a business.
Really? Well, yes.
I'd be appalling. No, I'm very much like I could never. I am not made of that stuff. But I think that's also a good lesson to know about yourself.
I've always said like life is a process of elimination.
Yes.
And when you can eliminate things, actually makes it a lot easier to make decisions about stuff. Like, that is not me. Just get rid of it.
Exactly. And it's like, I'm not good at it, and it wouldn't bring me joy.
I want to ask you just a couple more questions about the news. This is likely going out during an election cycle. Mm-hmm. What do you think the most important issue is? Maybe for women, maybe more broadly. Just what would you like to call out as the biggest issue in this election?
In this election? Oh, God, it is such a hard question. That is such a hard question.
I didn't give you any a heads up on this one either. I'm sorry.
One thing I'm interested in that I don't think has sort of been acknowledged by either party, and it might be too early, is I can't stop thinking about the impact of AI on the future of humanity. And I would love to hear some ideas about the guardrails that are going to be put in place. And I also understand why it's not the most pressing thing because it all feels so hypothetical. But when you look at 10 years ago where social media platforms were headed, it is bizarre in hindsight that there weren't guardrails around what they could and couldn't do. And now we're in a really complex time. And I'm also finding I think a lot of us are on the precipice of being like, oh, hold on, then in 10 years' time, the world we live in is going to look completely different. Like, I reckon 10 to 20 years' time, everything about our lives is just, someone said to me, if you went to a desert island and came back 10 years from now, you just would not recognise the world we're going to be living in. And that's terrifying. And I'm really interested in how the government is going to engage with that and how on earth you predict it. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot. And on a completely selfish but also not selfish because it's important for society, I am really interested in childcare, in policy around childcare. and especially after the Four Corners investigation.
Which I'm talking to you 2 nights after that
Yes.
aired. A lot of people will have watched it. It's
Yes.
become quite the news story.
Yeah, about
And we are in that zone.
yes,
You and I.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, about private childcare, privatisation of childcare. And I look at it and think, I just do not understand how governments can be expecting population growth, and when the fact is that a lot of parents just simply can't afford. And it's like, I'm going to have a child and I need to go back to work. It's not a question of even if I want to. Most people living in cities need to. And the cost of childcare is so high. And then add the layer of what we saw on Four
Is it
Corners.
safe?
And you
Yeah.
think, okay, so I not only feel the baseline level of guilt, but I also feel the guilt about, dear God, what's even
Going on there.
And I'm someone who is a huge proponent of how amazing early childhood workers are. Both my brothers work in early childhood and are saints, and 99% of the people who work in it are. But I think policy around that will be really, really interesting.
Claire, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. That was so fun. I could talk to you forever.
Thanks for watching. For more news with the Squiz, make sure to hit subscribe using the button below.
We're your shortcut to being informed.